What's going on, guys? Back at it again.
It's been a minute, hey?
Life has been in progress, like Salil said.
Indeed.
And that's the name of the podcast. Life in progress. That's what we're doing.
Yes.
Life. Did you want to talk about your thing, or we just talk casually about
I
whatever?
think we should just talk casually because it's been a minute since, to jump into a topic. I mean, I have a topic that I pitched I was even checking in, knocking and checking in. It's like, yo, do you still want to do this? Because, life gets busy, right? In progress, you have other things that pop up, and it's like you might not have the time and space for a certain thing that you've initially committed to. So, yeah. I was checking in mostly is like, hey, this is just a thought, but if you want to do that, we could do that. If you have other topics on mind, absolutely game for that.
What has happened since? A lot of things, I guess, have happened, I feel like, since the last time we did one for me, kind of. Maybe not a lot. It's just every so often I have these kind of, epiphany moments of certain things. But I'm trying to think of some off the top of my head. They're in my phone, which is recording me right now, which I reviewed before I started recording, but I'm drawing a blank at the moment. I mean, we always talk about, we talked about this, the drawing stuff. Did we talk about that on the podcast probably before? It doesn't really matter. But drawing has always been something that's intimidating for me, but always something that I wanted to do. I feel like we have talked about this, but it doesn't really matter. But I'm glad that I'm in that phase now because of now I'm drawing again. This is the third or fourth time that I've tried to be consistent with drawing. But it's one of those things where I guess it's one of those things when you care about it so much, that's probably why it's intimidating when you're not very good at it. Especially drawing to me is very difficult because it's you ever try to draw a hand from imagination? You can look at your hand and draw it and you can be pretty accurate, but if you try to draw a hand from imagination, for example, it's pretty fucking hard. You're gonna try to draw it and then you'll be like, that's so wrong. And there's certain things that you have in your head that are it seems clear in your head. You're like, yeah, it's gonna look like this, I can see it in my brain. And then you start putting the lines down and you're like, that's not it, and you just erase it and do it again. It's just getting worse and worse. I just can't figure it out. And it's because I've always wanted to be good at drawing that I think that's what's deterred me. Or when you're not, I'm impatient. It makes me impatient, right? So when you try to do stuff and you're not good at it, you're just the example I always give is what if you're you wanted to write. You're I want to write a novel, and you're so excited, you tell everybody I'm going to write a novel, and then you write it, and it's shit, and nobody likes it. It's terrible, right? Then that'd be so soul-crushing, because you told everybody it meant so much to you, identify as an author, right? But I was saying, this is something I've been saying to a lot of people, is in this past year, because of all the things I was doing, I'm pretty sure I said this on the podcast, but I tried some programming, I tried some pixel art, I learned how to play hockey, I tried to learn piano a little bit, I was doing all these things, and I think somewhere in there I developed the right mindset, I think, that allowed me to come back to drawing again, with the right type of mindset. So the analogy I always think about is, if you play RPG video games, when you have experience points and you have different skill trees to put those points into. So when it comes to in hockey, there's skating and there's stick handling and there's shooting and there's passing and there's a bunch of different skill trees you can put your experience points into. But at the beginning, when it's almost I developed this mindset where being at the beginning is almost more fun. They always talk about this beginner gains in the gym, or when people say when you want to learn something, the first 20 hours or whatever, there's all those rules. The first bit, you make the most gains if you just stick to it and grind through it. You'll get good at it just because there's so much to learn, right? The difference between nothing and a little bit of something is you can just, if you just stick to it, right? So whatever,
the consistency is
key. So whatever I put, so I was thinking about hockey, whatever I put my points into is gonna help at this point, stick handling or skating or whatever, it's all gonna add to it. And so that's where I think I somehow developed that mindset with all those other things. I think whatever you're doing is probably gonna help, right? I think about at the beginning of an RPG game, it's strength, defense, whatever, magic, and whatever, all that stuff. It's when you're at level 1 or 2 or 0, it's wherever you put your points is going to help at that point,
True.
right?
True.
And so I think when it came back to drawing, also over the years I've developed like enough basic knowledge of what the fundamentals are that I can draw like very simple things at least. And I think that's another key point is like when you're trying to learn or tackle something is to it's like you need the wins too. It's like that, you know, they always talk about finding the perfect balance of like challenging but not too challenging, but also like fun and whatever, like finding the flow, right? Where you're like enjoying it as well too. But part of that is finding...
just to elaborate on that, essentially, if a task is too easy, you are not able to... Yeah, you're bored, easily bored, not enough to keep you in it. If it's too hard, you're going to give up too soon. So essentially, it has to be hard enough for you to struggle, but not so hard that you give up.
Yeah. What was I saying again?
You were talking about picking up...
So like I think that's also part of like I think I have this problem, and I'm sure many people do as well, where I try to take on not like too much, but like the task is like I want it to be sick, right? Like I want it to be like fucking awesome. Right. But obviously I'm not at a level where I can do that yet. But I always try to push like, okay, how close can I get there? But that's what makes me impatient. Is because I'm taking on a task that like you're not ready for this. But you have to find that fun and still, or the enjoyment in doing the things that you can already do. So like drawing, so this is why they always start with like drawing a cube, right? Or drawing spheres, because you kind of have an idea, obviously, of how to draw like a sphere, right? Or a cube, right? Like you draw the square, then you draw the other square behind it, and you connect the lines, and then you have like a cube thing. And then that's like the basic building blocks of building most things that you see, like human body, like anatomy and all that stuff, is you can start with very simple basic shapes, and then you can visualize it. And this is where like I'm learning to, where drawing is a lot of like, they say this a lot, it's like your visual library, observational skills. It's mostly a way of seeing.
Yes.
It's not so much of like your skill with your hand as much, which obviously a lot of artists emphasize that too. So when you're doing your final line art on your final illustration, obviously you have to have like, don't just draw with your wrist, draw with your whole arm, so you can do like a nice clean stroke rather than just like little sketchy lines, which is important at the end. But I think at the beginning is being able to see, like, you know, if my hand is like this, if you're looking at the camera, this one's foreshortened, and then you're not really fully seeing this one or something like that, you know what I mean? Whereas they talk about this in one of these books, like left brain, right brain, which is not completely accurate, but just for the sake of this conversation, we'll use that way of thinking. One side of the brain is very like, I know I have 5 fingers, so I'm going to draw 5 fingers. And when you're drawing it like that, just looks stupid. Like if you try to keep drawing every single finger, whereas at certain angles, you're not really seeing all my fingers at all times, or all parts of the fingers. But that's using the other side of the brain, where you're just seeing, you're like, what are you seeing, right? So there's that too, and there's also seeing like the structure of things, the 3D structure behind something, right? So like a horse, you can break down into a bunch of like spheres and boxes and whatever, and then if you can see that, like this sphere is behind this sphere because that's the torso, but this is facing me, so this is in front. That's like a lot of good practice of like fundamentals, I think. And then I think staying with that stuff and then making it fun, like I always have those like just action figures that I can pose, and then trying to visualize the boxes of where they would go. I have enough success with that, which is the point I'm getting to, like to find things where you can have enough success with to balance those things where like you want to be really good at this thing, but it's too hard. You know what I mean? But if you try it and it's too hard, you also have to remember like, okay, there's some of these things where I am good at, right? Because I guess I have the problem of like, yeah, like I take too many, or I take the task that's too hard because I want it to be really cool or something, and then I get discouraged because I can't get there or whatever. Like I'm not at that level yet. Right, but I have to go back to those fundamentals that I'm like good enough at doing that I can feel good about. Like you need some wins too.
Yes,
you know.
Yes. So I mean, like I feel the same way within my coding journey, right? So like when you initially start off, you feel like, oh, okay, like I want to get there. So for me, it's like machine learning and NLP, but to be able to get to that point where you're leveraging those kinds of techniques, there is a lot of underlying computer science which, unless you put in the time to learn, you are confused. So I would just say finding the path. I think a lot of people also waste a lot of time in figuring out, you know, like, oh, what are the right fundamentals for me, right? So there is a thought where you can pick up something hard, look at a simpler version of implementing that, and then go from there. Because if if I go to learn the fundamentals of computer science or any particular subject, right? Like for drawing, if I like go down and think about posing or drawing hands or just faces, it will take me longer to get to, let's say, if my end goal is manga drawing, then I should probably start with the fundamentals of manga more so than the fundamentals of all drawing in general. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's with this particularly, like with drawing in general, that doesn't really apply. There, it applies in certain areas. So like,
okay, so because in like computer science, it kind of does. That's why
computer science makes sense.
Yeah,
like
yeah.
why would I learn C++ if
Exactly.
I'm not going to use that language?
Yes.
But drawing is more broad. Of like,
okay.
there's like fundamentals that like they'll apply to almost everything.
So then it depends on the subject.
Yeah, like unless you're only gonna draw like one thing. You know what I mean? But
Yeah,
like
plus and then
most
there's
people,
different styles
like when you
more
say
so.
manga drawing and like whatever, like for the most part, that means drawing mostly everything.
Or
right?
I
You know
was
what
thinking more like architectural drawing, right? Like if you're doing architectural drawings, you don't need to know how to draw like comic books or faces or like
yeah,
other things.
Sure.
It's
But most people that are like me,
yeah,
that are like I want to
Draw,
Like
yes.
there's like okay, well you should, unless you're
Yes.
doing abstract stuff,
Right.
you know.
Right.
But beyond that, there is something that does sort of apply where it's kind of like once you get the fundamental stuff, because like that most of that stuff applies to everything.
True.
But past that point, it's like, well, if you're mostly only gonna draw humans, you don't really need to draw dogs if you don't think you're gonna draw dogs later.
much,
You
yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it might help maybe, but like for the most part, if you're just gonna draw humans, just
Yeah.
draw humans.
Yeah.
Right. What was the other thing I was gonna say? Oh, just Bobby and I were talking about like goal setting because I was just venting about that. Like, I feel like when we grew up, there's this very like goal setting thing, right? And I'm not saying goals are bad. That's not what I'm gonna say. Goals can be great and they can be very motivating, but I don't think it should be the main driver of your motivation that often. And then people talk about this all the time. I feel like now, like in the era now, there's a lot of like this type of talk, you know,
Yes,
like the
which is
internal
enjoy the
rewards.
journey.
Yeah, internal rewards versus external rewards,
Yes.
stuff like that. But I think, like I was saying, I forgot if I said this on the podcast, but I think this is just a funny story that's sort of related to that idea, I guess. But people always have this kind of, you know, when you see something, well, I'll give this example first, which is the one I always use, which is like at the gym at kickboxing or MMA and stuff like that, where people come in and they're like, I want to take a fight. Or like why, or I ask them why they're training, and like I want to take a fight eventually, and they're like pretty new, they're like newbies, and I'm guessing that most of them, their reasoning, like what happened was they saw it on Instagram or on TV or whatever. They see the guy with his arm raised and the crowd's cheering and you know all the respect and all the love from people and whatever,
Yeah.
and they're like, fuck, I want to do that. That's
Yeah.
so cool.
I want
it's
that.
It's kind of like when I saw Zach do stand up and he was killing it.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, that's so cool. Like
Yeah.
that's not
Yeah.
that I didn't feel like I want to do what he's doing.
Right, but that's
the,
how
like,
you get inspired.
But like being in his element, like
Right.
being in the zone.
Yes.
And like, you know, feeling himself
Yes.
and like doing it. That's that's really cool. But people think that, oh, I have to do that.
Right.
Because that's where I'll get, and a lot of people, obviously, a lot of it's from the validation from other people around them
Right.
and their family, and everybody's gonna be like, "Oh my god!" Same thing, like I always say, is like marriage and like whatever, buying a house or some shit. People are like, "Oh my god, that's amazing! You're having a kid or whatever." You know, like that's so amazing.
Yeah.
The positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
But when they say I want to take a fight and they see that and that's what's motivating them, I don't think they know exactly what that means, right? So like I've seen it, obviously all my friends like at the gym have taken fights. I've seen it up close. 3 months you're going to have to take off probably if you want to do it right. You're going to have to go to the gym. If you work, you have to go to the gym no matter what because you're preparing for this fight. You want to be ready, right? If you want to do it properly, you got to show up, do the rounds. Then you're weight cutting throughout that, so you're dieting, right? So you're not going to have much energy in general to do anything else but train. Try to force yourself to train while you're, like, near the end, you're, like, malnourished, right? And you're dehydrated. And then at the last, like, couple days or whatever, or the last day, pretty much the last day only, you go in the sauna to cut the last couple of pounds off, because
Right,
usually,
water weight.
you cut the last bit of water, but you're already, like, depleted of energy.
Pretty much.
right? And you're just dead. I've seen them like to the point where you have to have your buddies like carry you out because you're like so just dead, but like just to get down to that weight. And it's so that's why I can see like a lot of professionals when they say they're going to retire or whatever. Like I remember this, I've said this in the podcast maybe before, but there's this one guy who he lost the fight, and then they're like, you know, the interview after, he's like, what's next for you? And then he's like, I don't know, I might just retire because it's like I have to leave my son for 3-4 months at a time, and he's like 4 or 7 or whatever it is. He misses me so much when I leave. I don't get to see him, and it's like you think about that when you it's like selfish for you because you can't do any. It's all about you. You have to train, do your thing. Like hey, like anybody needs anything, you kind of have to be like, no, I can't. I don't have the energy. I don't have the time, right? Because I have to just train. It's all about me. I have to recover in between training sessions because I'm not eating very much and all that stuff. But then also, like, imagine you doing that, you're suffering through it too. Like, selfish for you, and you're suffering because you're getting your ass kicked sometimes when you're depleted. You have no energy, but you have to fight as hard as you can. And then after 3 months of that, and then you do the fight, and then you lose. And then you're kind of like, what am I doing? Yeah. Like, what am I even doing? Life, right? Yeah. And so when people come in, they have that goal of, like, I want to take a fight eventually. You're kind of like, I mean, do it to find out, obviously. That's great, but I don't know if you have the right motivation if all you're thinking about, low-key, like, is just the end of being like, oh, I won, and everybody, you know. It's just, so the story I was going to bring up was, there was this girl I liked in high school, and I just thought, like, if I could just get with her before grade 12, then we'll live happily ever after that. And then, but it just, I guess, after, and this happened, this is my guess, but I think a lot of people have this kind of with the idea of marriage, too, where, like, now in hindsight, I know at that point I didn't really have an idea of what life was like after high school, obviously, right? Because you're in, you know, up to that point, you're just no school. And so I guess I just thought, you know, if I just get with her before high school, because if I don't, then she'll meet people in university or something, and then we get together, and then it'll just, I don't know, like, it'll just, but, like, obviously, life continues after that, but I didn't know what that was going to look like. I just thought that was the path, because I wanted this thing, and I think that's kind of where a lot of people, the potential problem when you have these goals or the things that you want to achieve is like, yeah, maybe it might even feel amazing to reach those things, and there's nothing wrong with that, but again, with it's like sports, when you win the championship, they talk about this a lot, where you have that, like, they go into, like, deep depression after, right? Because that high is so great at first, right? Because you're like, we won, oh my god, I got that thing. Mm-hmm. But life continues after that, and it's like, it's like marriage, you know? Like, yeah, like, the wedding will be amazing, yeah, but you realize the
marriage is gotta be, the rest
you're
of
married
life.
now, and like, is that, are you sure? Like, that was, you know, like,
no, a lot of people do struggle with the idea, like, successful people, if it is, so I think I remember the story of, like, a high school valedictorian or, like, a university valedictorian. They gave up on so much of their life to get that thing, and as soon as they got that, they were just like, like, you know what, my suggestion is, don't do what I did. Like, that's pretty much it. Which is, like, you give up on so much for, like, what, this, like, one moment? Is that really worth it for you? Again, and that's something, so I think there's a lot of self-awareness that comes into play, where you have to understand what are your motivations to want certain goals. Like, does it fit into your priority list, like, with the phase of life that you're in right now?
I mean, it's what we were, I mean, it's obviously what we were saying, like, that I try to, which I think everybody talks about this a lot now too, is like, it's like when the other analogy I use is like hockey, is like when I play with my friends, we play every week or whatever. Obviously I want to win, right? That's the goal, is I want to win. But if I don't win, that's not why I show up, right? Like, I don't show up because I'm like, I want to win, and if I don't win, it's like, what's the point? What's the point? What's the point of that? If I didn't win, like, why did I even fucking come? If I didn't, it's like, obviously not. Like, even if I lose, playing was still so fun. Like, it's still, like, the funnest thing right now in my life. Like, I have the most excitement doing it. And I think that, I mean, it's a classic thing that everybody talks about, but it is that, like, the process of what you're doing has to be fun. Like, and that's, I think, a lot of the things that I choose to do, are those things, and this is what I was talking about. Like I don't know if this works for everybody, but this is a good segue into something else I was thinking about, where I have some friends that are really good at tanking, like doing stuff they're not super hyped about, and there's something to that. I think I admire that work ethic, right? Of like, I don't really like it, but I'm gonna sit through it. And I think there's a purpose. Like, if there's a purpose behind it, then that's a super useful skill,
Yep.
right? Like a just ability to have. It's like, you know what, this sucks, but like I know at the end of this, it's worth it because
Yep.
there's a purpose to this. I'm lucky enough where, for the most part, and I also try to build my life like this, where I don't have to do. I try not to choose things. Like, I can tell. I think, again, I don't advise this for everyone necessarily, but I think it could work more than you would think. I feel like I can kind of tell within the first like day or couple hours, or like very early on, of whatever that new thing is, whether I like it or not. I think, right? And either way, it's led me to a place where I'm happy with what I'm doing, because I've tried, like, I don't really like this, and I don't really like that, and then it's led me to where I am now, where I've found, I'm playing hockey, I'm drawing, I'm doing all this stuff where I am excited, where like when I do, I'm like, no, this is it. Like, I can feel it. Like, this is fun. Like, this is fun. And I think that is like such a big part of life too, is like finding those things. I always think about like food. That's why the food is such a good analogy for me, because it's kind of like, I taste it, I'm like, yeah, it's not really right? Which is, I admire people that are like, yeah, I don't like it, but I'm just gonna keep eating it.
Yeah.
But again, if there's a purpose, I think I wish I had more of that sometimes. But I guess I just trust my intuition of like where it will lead me, hopefully. And it could, who knows, like in the future, maybe it'll lead me somewhere down a path like, oh, I should have stuck with that thing or whatever. But for now, like, I think I'm doing a lot of the things that I always wanted to, and it's led me back into certain places. And I've tried a lot of new things that I am finding like very fun, and I guess I just value that a lot, in like just what life should be, I guess, rather than just this list of achievements. Because like, again, like whether you achieve those things or not, there's always the one that Achilles brings up of, there's a clip of Mike Tyson. I think I probably talked about it on the podcast maybe before, but anyway, they're interviewing him like now when he's older, and they're looking back at his belts, and he's like, this is history being made. Like, aren't how do you feel about this? And then he's looking at these pictures and he's like, this is garbage. Like, it's garbage. This is Mike Tyson, right? And then he's like, what do you mean? And then he's like, at the time it meant everything to me, obviously, right? But you get older and your priorities change, and then you have family, and then you at some point, like right now, I just want my kids to be happy, which I'm not saying that he or I like are devaluing those belts or like fighting for those things at that point. But I guess you have to like take those achievements, those goals, achieving those goals as like what they are. They're just goals. It's like I said, like winning at hockey. It's like, okay, I win a hockey. Like, okay, yay. Like, I'll feel good at the time, but like, what are you really motivated by in life in general? Like, beyond that, like beyond the goals.
Yes.
Kind of thing, if that makes sense,
I think what has happened is I think the past few generations, Gen Z, millennials, as well as a little bit before that, have looked at life as these goals, right? Like, hey, I want to achieve these things, and that will give me the kind of life that I want to live, right? Like a happy, whatever their ideal is of a happy, like successful life, they are seeing it as those boxes checked or those goals achieved. But actually, life is the moment that you live in, right? Like how are you in the moment every day, and it's the journey of all of those moments together. The collective of every day is what you're like, what you feel about your life. It's not those like high points or those milestones that you would possibly talk about on like like when you're trying to sell yourself somewhere. But it's slightly different, I'd say.
I think it's like when we talk about, I mean, Bobby brought this up of that I talk about this a lot, how, and I've said this in the podcast probably 3-4 times, is that regret is about the moment that you're in. It's not actually about what happened in the past, because again, sports is a great example. There's so many examples, but if you win the game in sports, you're like, I don't regret anything that happened, even all the mistakes or whatever. Like, we won, right? I feel good about I don't regret anything, because even if I made those mistakes, whatever happened led up to this victory. If you lose, it almost sometimes doesn't matter how well you played or how well anyone played or how good the game was or whatever. You're like, I regret it kind of because we lost. But that moment of winning or losing is what defines how you feel about the past. But actually, like, what if you played the best game you've ever played, but just by, whatever happened in the game, you lost. Right. So you don't really have control of, like, and that's the other thing I was thinking about too, is like, what you do is in your control.
True.
Right?
And also, failure is not always a bad thing.
No, that's something else.
Yeah.
But what you do is in your control, but the outcome is not, right? This is that other saying that's like,
yes,
the choosing is not wrong ever. Like, choosing is you should always choose whatever it is, choose. The result or that choice might end up being the wrong one, but you didn't know anyway what would have, right? So you choosing is never wrong. The choice may be wrong, which you'll find out later, but you choosing is never wrong.
Yes.
But that goes back to what I was saying about how, like, what you do, I know this sounds kind of airy-fairy, but, like, what you do is in your control, but what happens is not.
And that's like...
It's like golf, right? Like,
it is.
You hit the ball,
yes,
and, like, what you did was in your control. Like, you swung and hit the ball, but, like, the wind or, like, a bird or something, like, you don't know what's going to happen.
Yes.
Right?
And I think a lot of people even face a problem before that, because we have a problem of overchoice. So making that choice is also difficult, because there's just so many choices. The choice paradox, plus then the fact that, I think the idea that if I make a choice and I fail, that also keeps them from making a choice, right? It's like, because I want to make the right choice.
Yeah.
And
because you don't want to like make it's the wrong one, and then you regret it, right? But that's the thing, is like you just don't know, right? Like, it's the same thing with, like, so I'm talking to this girl, kind of, like, not really, but, like, I'm sort of talking to this girl, but it's like, we were playing that game, right? Like, in my head, I'm playing that game, like, if I say this, then what would I? But like you don't know, like, you have no idea. You have no idea. Maybe she's into, maybe she's not, maybe she's playing. I have no context.
Yes.
And there's, like,
unless you ask.
Yeah, but even then, like, like, there's a level of, like, stuff that you're just never gonna know.
Yes.
So, like, whatever I do, it's like, it's not that it doesn't matter. It's just that there's no way for me to know what the thing is. But that doesn't mean I should just, like, overanalyze, for one, or not do anything.
True.
Right. It's just pick a thing, and then it might work out. It might not. Right.
Yeah.
What was the other thing I was going to say was, do you remember, I always talk about this movie, but not because it was a good movie, because Adjustment Bureau. Have you heard of that one?
I have heard of it, but I don't remember.
This just goes back to the goal thing or whatever, but there's just a moment in the movie where, like, you know what, Good Will Hunting is also, like, a very similar type of thing, where it's like, they have a character who's like, you have so much potential, right? And, like, they almost... Well, at least Good Will Hunting is almost like, you almost owe it to everybody. Because you have so much potential. Adjustment Bureau is just like, like, the plan, which is, it's very, like, Christian-y, kind of. I don't know if that's what they're trying to do. But they're like, the plan from the Adjustment Bureau, like, they didn't have it. This guy, they didn't plan for him to have, like, this amazing life that he could have, because he had the potential to, but the plan didn't allow for it. But sometimes the Adjustment Bureau has to come in and make those adjustments, either, like, make their life better or worse, or give them more achievements or not, or whatever, like, kind of, like, put them on a path, type of thing. But I guess to me, it's like the answer in the same way is kind of like, I mean, yeah, like, you may have the potential to do this or that, but, like, it's your life, like, what do you want to do, right? Because I think a lot of people, that's another struggle that people have when it comes to, like, these goals and stuff, like the expectations. Like, it reminds me of, we have, like, these interns, like, that, like, from high school that are just volunteering at the gym. And then one of them's, like, she's one of those, like, super A+ students kind of thing, like, straight A's and stuff. And then I was like, I can't remember what, I was asking about her and her mom or something, and she was like, me and my mom get along because we both have, like, very high expectations for, like, ourselves or me or whatever.
Right.
And then, but I get it, because, like, at that age, it's either you're doing well in school, which means you're a good person, or you're not doing well in school, which means you're shitty. Right? Those it's very binary. It's very, like, one scale that determines everything. But obviously, to me, I'm like, what does that even mean? Like, you have high expectations for like what? Like, what direction are these expectations setting in, right? Like, high expectations, like athletically, or like just with school with certain things. Like, do you want to achieve these things, or like what is? I don't understand. Like, not that I don't understand, but like, this is too like I said, it's too binary. It's too like one scale. But I could see people being like, yo, like, you're so smart. Why don't you just like do well in school and stuff? Like, why don't you just like do like why don't you? And I feel like a lot of people will fall into those types of like, they'll do it for those reasons because it feels good to also have people, and also when you don't have a direction sometimes you're like, well, no, everybody says like I should be whatever, this, and then you do it and they say you're that's good job, you're doing it, and then you're like, okay, and then hopefully like, well, I don't know, hopefully or not hopefully, but one day you may or may not like wake up and be like, why am I unhappy? I don't know why am I, you know, like,
but I think, you know, letting other people choose your destination for you can lead you to an unhappy place.
I just don't think, but yeah, I think everybody agrees with that. I just don't know if people can recognize it.
No, they don't, because like a lot of the times, like, again, you know, I'm thinking about like brown people. We have a thing where, again, this is with all Asian people, we love to, like, you know, make our parents happy. It's like a thing that we all are raised with. It's like, oh yeah, you are a good son if you make your parents happy, and what they want for you could be different from what you want for yourself. So how do you reconcile with that? Are you able to, you know, stand up for yourself, put down those boundaries, and then figure out what is right for you or not, right? And yeah, there's multitudes of reasons why people fuck up.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. Is there?
Yeah, I'm like, I got hungover. I shouldn't be drinking. I drank like on Friday. I wasn't hoping to, and then I was hungover like all day yesterday too. So.
Oh shit! What was it? One of those events?
Yes, it was.
Where'd you
go? Levels. We had so many people. They were.
Was it fun?
Yeah.
That's why you got drink, so it's fun. Nice, that's good. Is Levels like, does it have games and stuff?
No, Levels has no games.
You'd think it would, because it's called Levels.
It has 3 levels.
But no games.
But no games. And 3 different, so essentially 3 different dance floors, and 3 different DJs played different kinds of music. So
I see.
Yeah.
I don't really go out that much, so I don't really know.
Mean, not that I do as much either, but hey, I did, and it was a fun night.
Yeah. Oh, it's good.
So, yeah. So we'll catch up with you next time, and hopefully this was a good update on Life in Progress. Cheers.